Comrades and friends, how do I begin to talk about Fidel?
That look good?
There are as many positive adjectives to describe Fidel as there are kinds of snowflakes. Revolutionary, Marxist-Leninist, internationalist, communist, environmentalist, father, leader, husband, statesperson, strategist, anti-imperialist, scientist, unifier, comandante. I could go on. And to all those adjectives, you could add brilliant in front of the word, and it would be no exaggeration whatsoever. But one word certainly stands out right now as we witness the Cuban masses in the millions come out to say their final farewell to Fidel. Beloved. Fidel was beloved by the Cuban people, and not just by the Cubans, but by all of us around the world who yearn and struggle for our liberation. If you had a chance to see the many beautiful scenes from that farewell in Cuba, or if you were able to watch on Telesur the memorial Tuesday night in Havana, where world leaders gathered with the Cubans to pay tribute to Fidel, you could see the love for this great leader. And you could hear the sorrow in their voices. You could feel the resoluteness to continue his work. Let me clarify. Fidel was not loved because love trumps hate. No, not at all. Fidel was loved because he built a revolution. Fidel was loved because his skills and talent not only brought socialism to an island 90 miles from imperialism, but because he was able to build the foundation that would make it last long after he no longer walked the earth. Fidel was loved because above all, his priorities and sacrifices were for the good of humanity, never for himself. That is why Fidel was loved by so many. What a life he lived. Born August 13, 1926 in Biran, Cuba, in the southeast part of the island, Fidel's youth was marked by turbulent politics. In 1940, the brutal Fulgencio Batista became president of Cuba. He governed until 1944 and returned to power in 1952 through a coup. Batista ruled Cuba with an iron fist and was one of the most bloody and repressive dictatorships in Latin America. He, of course, had the complete support of the U.S. government. Like it considered all of Latin America and the Caribbean, Cuba for the U.S. was a place to extract and rob resources for the profits of the multinational corporations. Cuba, as has been described by historians, was also used as the U.S.'s playground, where casinos, bars, and hotels were in the plenty due to the deep roots organized crime had on the island prior to 1959. In today's New York Times, there was a piece that states, and I quote, "In a scene from The Godfather 2, Cuba's dictator Batista shows off a solid gold telephone in the presence of U.S. business leaders who gave it to him as thanks for his business-friendly policies," end of quote. And the author went on to say that the U.S.-owned Cuban telephone company actually did that in 1957. Imagine, a gold telephone. But on January the 1st, 1959, all that came to an end. After several years of struggle and many efforts with many historic moments that not only will never be forgotten, but should be studied in the period ahead, Fidel was able to unite the movement to oust the Batista regime and made history just 90 miles from the shores of imperialism. At this moment, several important meanings are emerging from the death of our beloved comrade. One of those is unity. First and foremost, the Cuban people are declaring that they will remain united to continue Fidel's obra, his work. Nicolás Maduro and Evo Morales affirm that they will continue to unite Latin America to defend their sovereignty. This does not come as a surprise, as indeed one of the important pillars of Fidel's work is unity. Before the triumph of the revolution, the Latin American movement argued that the United States would never tolerate a socialist revolution in this region, that it was impossible to defeat a regular army, even with guerrilla tactics. Fidel proved them wrong. Even though armed struggle was heavily debated, to Fidel there was more than guns. He sought a political strategy. He built a political coalition instead of solely focusing on the armed struggle. To achieve victory against the brutal Batista dictatorship, the task to him was to unite as many social forces as possible. Fidel carefully built unity, not just with the revolutionaries, but reformists and even reactionaries. Anyone who had a contradiction or opposition to Batista, he brought them in. No one fought for unity like Fidel. He sometimes had to retreat, but he never ceded on his fundamental principles. This is how Fidel was able to begin a political process that transformed the island of Cuba from one terrorized by torture, dispossession, extreme poverty, and exploitation, as well as killings, to one where the workers ruled, where wealth was redistributed not to the banks or corporations, but back into society. The wealth of the island was redistributed for the people, not the banks. Education and healthcare was universal, not just for the rich. In fact, there wasn't too many rich, because they had all squirmed away and fled to Miami. This is why Fidel is so loved. Now, don't get me wrong. Despite the early days of debate on armed struggle, Fidel knew when arms were important. The 1961 invasion by Cuban exiles, orchestrated and financed by the U.S. government at the famous Bay of Pigs, aimed to bring down the Cuban Revolution. It failed. Because the people were with Fidel's revolution. Because the peasants who had been starved and beaten, because the Afro-Cubans who had been denied access to the beaches and were brutal victims of colonial racism, have for the first time in history come to the forefront as agents of society. For the first time in Cuba, the workers were the agents of change, not the bourgeoisie. In fact, the revolution got rid of the bourgeoisie altogether. The Cuban leadership did what had been attempted in Mexico in 1910, but failed, because Mexico didn't have a Fidel. This is why the Cuban people love Fidel. Because in Mexico, tens of thousands are dying while the bourgeoisie gets richer, which is so different from the class peace in Cuba. And this is why the imperialists hate Fidel, and what earned him forever the ire of imperialism. For ousting the ruling class, the imperialists will never forgive Fidel. Fidel is loved for his agrarian reform, for establishing one of the world's most ambitious literacy campaigns, and for developing a free world-class healthcare system that even bourgeois organizations commend. And that was only the beginning. Since 1959, Fidel has shown over and over that he was a leader like no other. I don't want to and can't cover everything tonight because I know that so many of you wish to share and express your sentiments. But I feel compelled to bring up some other highlights from Fidel's life work. Because the fact that he was able to establish the revolution was great and momentous. That he was able to defend the revolution for 57 years is extraordinary. But that he was able to lay the foundation to assure that the revolution would survive after his death is historic. Over 600 times the U.S. and their pawns attempted to assassinate Fidel. How was he able to survive over 600 attempts on his life? Now, I heard this story from one of the Cubans. I don't know if it's true, but it sounds true, and I think it could be true, so I'm going to repeat it. In the early days, and some comments may know this for a fact, but in the early days of the revolution, there was a Afro-Cuban that the imperialists had maneuvered to get close to Cuba, to get close to Fidel to assassinate him. And this Cuban was so impressed by Fidel that it wound up him telling him that he was there to kill him. And he later became Fidel's main bodyguard. And so it isn't true. I mean, whether it's true or not, you can't survive 600 assassination attempts unless you have the full support of the masses. You just can't do it. Now, how many times has it been said or written that Cuba is a beacon, a shining example for the world? It's not rhetoric. This is true. Cuba seems to be able to do anything it puts its mind to. It survived the special period of the 90s. When the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist camp occurred, the Cuban people were hungry. They were tired. They were exhausted. The shortages made it extremely hard. Any other developing nation would have seen rebellions, would have seen chaos and uprisings, would have seen repression and police in the streets with arms, but not in Cuba. Because of Fidel and its revolutionary socialist leadership, because the revolution has the support of the masses, because the revolution and the people are one, the country pulled together and survived this dire period. Who could forget the struggle to return the child Elian Gonzalez? In late 1999, Elian's mother misguidedly took her child with her on the seas in an attempt to get to Florida. She sadly died in that voyage. But Elian survived and was kidnapped by hostile counter-revolutionary forces and taken to Miami. For several months, the Cubans supported the struggle of Elian's father, Juan Miguel, to get him home. And get him home they did. Yeah. The Cuban flag, as we all know, these are heroes, anti-terrorists, who sacrificed a great deal to monitor hostile military actions in Florida against Cuba. The U.S. imprisoned them for dozens of years, but the Cuban people and its leadership and its supporters focused decades to free them, and free them they did. Ricardo Alarcón, a known leader who was head of the National Parliament at one time, devoted 24/7 of his life to get the Cuban Five back home. And home they went. It's not a small thing at all. These are just some of the accomplishments I wish to highlight. There is so much more that I'm sure we will hear tonight. Cuba's role in Africa, in Haiti, in fighting Ebola, and so on are so important and stellar examples of Cuba's internationalism. The first calls for canceling the foreign debt and bringing attention to climate change came from Fidel and are more examples of his exemplary leadership. I wish to end with one point. And it is a point that I know is on everyone's mind, and that is the need to study Fidel. We must study Fidel so that we can live like Fidel. Fidel's concept of the battle for ideas is timelier than ever. There is a certain talk by Fidel that is being circulated right now that I'm going to quote from. But frankly, you can pick up any talk of Fidel's and quote from it and read from it and learn from it. Everything he says or writes is packed with meaning or provides rich lessons for our struggle. But I quote from a May Day 2000 speech. Quote, Revolution means to have a sense of history. It is changing everything that must be changed. It is full equality and freedom. It is being treated and treating others like human beings. It is achieving emancipation by ourselves and through our own efforts. It is challenging powerful dominant forces from within and without the social and national milieu. It is defending the values in which we believe at the cost of any sacrifice. It is modesty, selflessness, altruism, solidarity, and heroism. It is fighting with courage, intelligence, and realism. It is never lying or violating ethical principles. It is a profound conviction that there is no power in the world that can crush the power of truth and ideas. Revolution means unity. It is independence. It is fighting for our dreams of justice for Cuba and for the world, which is the foundation of our patriotism, our socialism, and our internationalism. End of quote. Fidel lived those words every moment of his life. Tuesday night in Havana, President Nicolás Maduro from Venezuela spoke at Fidel's tribute and told about the time he and Evo had a meeting with Fidel about a year ago. Fidel had already gotten sick. He told him that night that he would only make it to 90. Maduro and Evo said, "No, Fidel, we need you." Fidel told them, "My time has come. I have done all I can. Now it's your turn." Imagine the pressure Evo and Maduro must feel right now to continue the work of Fidel. Imagine how our comrade Raúl and all the other leaders in Cuba now feel with the loss of Fidel. Well, comrades, I have two things to say on that. We have full confidence in Raúl Castro and the Cuban people that they will continue the work of Fidel. Socialism will not be defeated in Cuba. It will not. And second of all, comrades and friends, we have to feel the same pressure that Evo and Maduro feel too. We are far from having the responsibilities they have on their shoulders. I mean, they've taken state power, we've taken a little room. But we must feel the pressure nonetheless. The pressure to build the movement at this time, no matter what it takes. I commit myself to remember Fidel the next time I get angry with the white comrades or anybody, the next time I get impatient or tired or angry. But frankly, we all know how hard it is. I don't mean just for me, but for everyone. Because this society we live under is the worst, the most racist, oppressive, and sick. U.S. capitalism is so corrupt. We are subjected to so much every single day, every waking minute. How can you be like Fidel? How can you be healthy revolutionaries in a time of police terror? The psychological toll that takes on the oppressed is unspeakable. How the hell can we be healthy revolutionaries in a time of a presidency with a racist sexual predator and a conversionist anti-gay vice president? But healthy revolutionaries we must be. Healthy revolutionaries we must be. And let's admit, being in the struggle and being in our party, we are as healthy as we can be under this society. But we must do more. We have been so fortunate to be alive at the same time as Fidel. We have had the opportunity and good fortune to walk the earth the same time as Fidel, to breathe the same air that Fidel breathed, to have heard and seen Fidel many times in New York City or May Day in Cuba in person. We lived in the same time as Fidel, which is the same as the honor to have lived in the time of Lenin. So let us take that responsibility right now, tonight and from now on, and commit ourselves to be like Fidel, fight like Fidel, live like Fidel. Long live the Cuban Revolution!